Tim, I'm incredibly excited about spending some time with you today, and thank you so much for your time. I know these are unusual days for you, and I'm assuming you probably are in somewhat still of a transition from Houston
That's right.
to Chicago. So we are just grateful for a few minutes of your time today, and I want to kind of get behind the scenes with that transition, and from Vanderbloemen and living in Houston to now Chicago and being the new executive pastor at the Willow Creek Church. So on August the 25th, you wrote a blog that caught my eye, and I love your titles. They're always provocative, and they make you want to open it up to see what you meant by what you said. But you call the blog, "I freaking signed up for the dip." And even if I didn't know you, I would want to read that just by that title. So let's get behind the scenes a little bit and talk about that title. First of all, you said in the blog that you were hoping to go to have a front row seat at the Leadership Summit that Willow hosts every year, and like everyone else, you watched it from your couch, and you mentioned that Craig Groeschel kicked off the summit with a session that he called "Leading Through the Dip," and
That's right.
And he made the comment that many church leaders may find themselves leading through the dip. And then your response to that was, you didn't just find yourself, you signed up for this, leading through the dip. And so what do you mean by the word? What did Craig mean by the word dip? What do you mean by the word dip?
Yeah, it was a fantastic talk if you have a chance to see it. So Craig was talking about just the normal life cycle of an organization that, it starts and it kind of fast growth, and then it kind of stabilizes, and then it kind of plateaus. And then most organizations, unless you figure out a new way to innovate, they start to do this. And he talked about, I think he was sharing, from Life Church, he said, we're kind of like right here, and there's this little dip. And he said, in a lot of ways, a lot of churches in this COVID season are finding themselves leading in a dip. And sometimes things get worse before they get better when you're leading in the dip. And as I'm sitting there listening, my wife and I were watching from the sofa in my apartment here, close to the church where it was actually happening, but we couldn't be inside. And I just I didn't find myself here. I signed up for this. And what I meant by that was like a lot of the church world knows, some of the recent history of Willow, long history of Willow, amazing legacy, but a couple years of just difficulty. And because I had been involved with my work at Vanderbloemen in the search for the new senior pastor, I had I kind of had an under the hood look, pretty deeply at some of the struggles, some of the challenges that the new senior pastor was going to have. Layer onto that, I think it was March 31st that the new senior pastor was chosen by the elders. So that was 3 weeks into COVID. And then a week or two later is when he invited me to join the team as well. So knowing you're coming into that is what I meant. So challenges, where attendance has been down for several years, finances down significantly, scandals, front page stories in New York Times and Chicago Tribune and elsewhere. So the challenges of walking into that, yet signing up for it, moving my wife and I across the country for that, I don't regret it. It's 6 months this week, I think, was when I came on. I knew what I was signing up for, and I can see such hope and such promise. We haven't turned it around yet. We're still here, but you can just kind of see it. I don't know if it's 6 months away or 3 years away, but you can kind of see it.
I loved that you included in the blog the phrase that you have absolutely no buyer's remorse.
Yeah.
In making the decision. So walk us through, Tim. What were those first couple of weeks like? Again, knowing you signed up for it, but you can't meet with your staff in person. And I think you also commented that all of the introductions were behind a mask, which just different. What were those first weeks like, and all?
Strange, joining a new church staff and not being able to actually meet anyone. There are still dozens of staff members I've never seen in person. I've only seen in this way via Zoom.
And Tim, about how many staff members does Willow have that will, in some way, you will be over?
We've done some furloughs this summer. But when I started, there was about just under 490 total people. I think it was about 360 full-time equivalents that were on staff at the time across 7 campuses. And so, and we still haven't actually met in person in any buildings for any kind of services. We have had some outdoor gatherings at various campuses, but so I've met, I don't know, maybe 300 people out of 20,000 some that would call Willow their home. So it's a strange time to be, for any leader, it's a strange time to be transitioning into a new church, into a new place.
And I know for you, Tim, creating culture, relational kind of teamwork, that's always been at the heart of what you've done, how you built the amazing team at Granger. And you and I did a webinar once just about building team and building culture. And at the heart of that is being together and doing things in person. And so, how has that been a challenge to your normal leadership style of building culture and building team?
Huge challenge, because when you walk into any organization, you're building trust, you're earning trust. When you walk in an organization where trust has been decimated, or you're starting kind of way below zero at the trust level, just by the fact that you're a leader and leaders have failed us. And then trying to build trust, earn trust, and build culture when you can't actually get in the same room with folks. Super, super challenging. So, this summer we've had actually 2 now in-person staff meetings where we got maybe 40% of the people actually physically there in an outdoor tent. So, but we're starting to just kind of like create some momentum events like that, doing, once we got early on, it's kind of like, okay, we're on Zoom. Let's make plans for when we're not on Zoom. Then you get to the point midsummer, it's like, we're going to be on Zoom for a really long time. So what can we do digitally to create culture, to have fun? So we're just trying to infuse different ways to have fun into the culture, talking a lot about just, who we're to be about. We don't have we haven't been here long enough to have a real specifically laid out vision plan for the next 5 years, but here's who we're going to be about as a people, and just to be talking about that over and over. I think part of building culture is just sharing leadership, raising up other leaders, and letting them take part in leading some of those conversations and devotionals and prayer time.
Okay. Before we finish today, I do want to come back to that around the vision, because you also touch on that in the blog, and just kind of reaffirming the DNA of the church and all. But before we get there, there were 2 other things you mentioned in the blog that had to have been challenges to coming as the new XP in a pandemic, and that was the furloughs, because you mentioned building trust and all those things, and right early on, because of the dip in giving and activities, you had to let some staff go. And then the George Floyd tragedy, and you mentioned that as well. Talk a little bit about those 2 challenges to coming as a new XP.
Yeah. So sequentially, the George Floyd tragedy happened first. So I mentioned I started in April. Dave Dummett's our new senior pastor. We both had our first day in the office, physically in the office, May 15th. And I think George Floyd was killed a week and a half later. So instantly, just, in every church and every community across the country, this has been true, but instantly kind of just the tension, the pain of people of color on our staff, in our congregations, in the community, the expectations, the demands, the heartache, all of that. Dave's first weekend to preach, it was the week after that, the Sunday after that, and so even figuring out what do we say, about this, how do we address it? How do we not just give a nod to it? So lots of conversations through the summer with our staff about the hard conversations where, people were upset that I was hired as a white guy, and that felt like it was demeaning to other people that could have had this role. So things like that are just really, really personal and hard, and it comes from, people's walk and life and lens, and so allowing space for that pain to come out, sometimes even sideways, and being okay with that. And then jumping in this fall, we've just jumped into some significant training as learners. I'm not teaching it, Dave's not teaching it, or we're bringing other facilitators in just to take us through some of the history of the church in relation to racism, and some of the things that we can do coming out of it. So that was significant. And then furloughs, you mentioned, we had to initiate in July, and that was for people that, from March through end of June, partially because of the PPP money from the government. We were able to keep everyone on, but we got to a point where we had just a lot of people that just couldn't work, mostly facility based. All of our facilities were closed, so facility care folks, people that did food service and stuff out of our campuses, those types of positions where there just wasn't any work to be done. So difficult conversations in July related to that, for sure.
And were those decisions collaborative, Tim? Did they primarily fall on your shoulders, or was that shared?
Very collaborative. Yeah, really, really great leadership team. Was interesting. Someone mentioned, someone said the term they used for Willow Creek. They said Willow Creek had an entire leadership lobotomy, which is not entirely untrue, because all of the elders and 24 out of 25 of the senior leaders in the church no longer here. But the 25th, he's amazing.
Is that the one you mentioned, the name you mentioned?
Yeah.
Yeah,
his name's Matt Sunstedt. He was our CFO. We've changed his title to Executive Pastor of Operations. Amazing, gentle leader that has a grasp of the numbers and is able to pastor people through difficult conversations. And so he really ran point on a lot of that work for us.
What do you see the next season of Willow looking like?
Yeah, it's hard to answer without saying, are we talking with COVID or without COVID? But so walking in, just forgetting the fact that COVID happened, there was just the model for staffing for Willow was not going to be sustainable. So there was a bit of right sizing that was going to need to be taking place, regardless of who was the leader here, or with or without COVID. So there's a bit of those conversations. What's the right model going forward? I think there was pieces of the DNA that are just huge and historical and rich and right about Willow. Some of that a little bit dormant, that it's like we just need to revive some of that DNA. And so I think there's a piece of that. And I think COVID, we're going to talk about that, I know, more as we continue here, but COVID, I think, just changes a lot about what the future looks like as well. And we don't exactly know what that means yet. I don't think anyone does, but we're talking about it every day.
Thank you. What an honor.
Oh, absolutely.
And what a privilege to call you friend. And just grateful that we could share some time together.
Absolutely. Thanks for the time.